Hi, everybody. In this statistics video, what we're going to do is think a little bit. I'm just hiding my meeting controls there so I can see everything. We're going to think a little bit about how we can use a combination of a chatbot along with R to run correlation analyses, regression analyses, and logistic regression analyses in addition to your standard linear regression. So we're going to kind of work through this the same way that we did our last R video, where I'm going to give you a literal click-by-click example of all of the analyses that you need to do. And then you're going to have the opportunity to try it out on your own using those vibe coding tools that we're talking about. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to work on is running a correlation analysis of multiple different variables, and then using the output of that analysis of our variables in our correlation matrix to decide which variables we should potentially explore further with a linear regression. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with first things first. As you can see, since I'm sharing my screen here, we've got RStudio loaded up. And what I'm going to do first is just let RStudio know where my working directory is. So remember we talked about this last time, but I'm just going to go ahead and go through it one more time here. So all I have to do in RStudio is go up here to where it says session, and then I click. I move my cursor down to where it says set working directory, and then when I head over here, I can hit choose directory. And then that's just going to pull up a file pane for me. And I've got my directory in my documents, so I'm just going to scroll down, click on R directory right there, and then click the open button. And that's going to tell R where my working directory is. And now if you look down at this bottom left pane here where I'm moving my cursor, you can see it says set WD, which stands for set working directory, and then it shows that file right there. Okay, so we're good to go there. Next, what I want to do before I read in my data is give you a chance to take a look at the data file that we're going to be looking at. And so I've got it pulled up here in Excel for you. And I just wanted to give you an overview of the data that we're going to be looking at. So as you can see here, we've got four different columns labeled MOSC abund for mosquito abundance, temp deg C for temperature in degrees Celsius, relative humidity, and distance to water. So four different variables. And each of these are numeric variables with values in there, right? And what we want to do is correlate mosquito abundance versus each of these three environmental variables to see if mosquito abundance is significantly related to any of these reasonable environmental variables that you would anticipate would impact mosquito behavior and potentially ability to reproduce. Okay, so that's our data set that we've got there. What we want to do now is read it into R. And remember, reading data into R just means saying, hey, R, I've told you that you're going to be accessing data from this file, in my case, labeled R directory, that is your working directory. And here's specifically the file that I want you to be looking at and pulling data from. Because right now, R knows I'm going to be pulling data from a file called working directory, but it has no idea what data file we want it to use. So, as you'll remember from last time, a really easy way of doing this is using your chatbot of choice, that could be Gemini, Copilot, whatever you're comfortable with, to produce that code. So, like we talked about before, one of the most important things we can do when talking to a chatbot is make sure that we're specific in what we want that chatbot to do. So, I'm going to start out my request in ChatGPT here by saying, I have a data file that I want to read into R. The data file, oops, the data file is named, and then I'm going to give it the exact name here. So I'm going to go over to my working directory where you can see I've got R directory. And here's that file. And this is available for you in Carmen as well. So you'll just need to download that file to your computer, save it to your working directory, and then you'll be able to pull it up too. Now I've already got mine saved in my working directory, of course, but again, you're going to access yours by going to the appropriate module in Carmen, downloading this file, and saving it to your working directory. Now, the way that I like to make sure that my file name is exactly what I need it to be for R to access it, I usually just go in and I straight up copy and paste it directly from my file. So now that I've got that copied and pasted over, I can head right back over to ChatGPT and let it know that my file is named this.csv. Now I added in that .csv, and that just means it's saved as a comma separated value folder. Remember that this is a place where we can often get into trouble with difficulties reading in that code, and there's a lot of common reasons for that that we went over in our last video. Just to summarize them. When you download that file, one, if you don't save it in what you've identified as your working directory, R will not be able to find it. A really nice analogy that one of you told me before is that it's like R is looking in the living room for ingredients to a recipe, but you've put them in the kitchen. You have to tell R, hey, the ingredients are in the kitchen, not in the living room, and you have to actually put the ingredients where you've told R to put them, or where you've told R to look for them. Exact same idea here. You're telling R, hey, here's my working directory, and you have to put the file in that working directory. Another really common error at this point is not naming the file correctly. So if you've downloaded that file and it gets downloaded multiple times for whatever reason, maybe you got mixed up about whether or not it downloaded. If you download it multiple times, each successive download will add a parenthetical 1 or 2 at the end of that file. So if I've got this highlighted expression here, and I've told ChatGPT, hey, here's what I named my file, but my file is actually named homework correlation regression data parentheses 1, R is not going to be able to read it in. If you are a Mac user, remember another really common error at this point is that the file will automatically convert to a numbers file, and R is not going to be able to read that. So go back in, if you're a Mac user, make sure it's not saved as a numbers file and that it's actually saved as a CSV. Okay, so once all of that is taken care of, we've got our prompt here. I have a data file that I want to read into R. The data file is named this, produce code to read this file into R. Okay, and now we're just going to let the chatbot do its thing. And it says, okay, good deal. And it gives me this code. So now I'm just going to hover my mouse over this little copy button right here, and I'm going to click it. And now all of this code that's contained in the chatbot right here, I can head over to R, and in my upper left-hand pane where I've got my coding resource over here, I can copy and paste that in. Now, at this point, all I have to do is put my cursor on whatever line I want to run in R, and then I just go to this little run button that my cursor is hovering over. So now I'm going to hit run and see if it worked. And voila, it did in fact work. But I can even make super sure that it worked by doing that next bit of code that R gave me where it says view the first few rows, and I hit run on that, and I can in fact see that my data has been appropriately populated. Okay, so this is great news. The next thing that I want to do, though, is introduce a handy trick for you all that we didn't talk about in the last video, which includes uploading screenshots to the chat bot to help it do what you want it to do. Now, the exact way that you take screenshots on your device might vary depending on if you're using a PC or a Mac. I've got a PC, so I know how to do it on my specific device. But remember, Google exists, and you can always say, I have a Mac. How do I take a screenshot? And then it will let you know. Or I can't find the print screen button on my computer. How can I take a screenshot? And it'll tell you how to do that. So that should be pretty straightforward. And I'm guessing most of you know how to take screenshots at this point anyway. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take a screenshot of this output in the bottom left-hand portion of my R display where I've got each of these columns clearly labeled. You'll remember when we're asking R to do an analysis, and we're about to ask it to do a correlation analysis, telling it what the variables are and how they're organized is critically important. Now, one way to do that is just to copy and paste this row here or take it directly from your Excel file and put that into R. But another way that you can do that is just by taking a screenshot. So what I'm going to do is click my print screen button, and then it pulls up a little cursor for me where I can pick the portion of the screen that I want to take a screenshot of. So I'm just going to highlight this portion here that's got my variable names. And now I've got that screenshot captured. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is head back over into ChatGPT and say, I want to run a correlation analysis with the variables in this screenshot. Produce code in R to run this analysis. And then I'm going to do a little paste situation here where I'm going to hit paste, and that's going to add my screenshots. Okay, so now I'm going to tell ChatGPT what I want to do. Okay, so it's going to think for a little bit. And just like that, it extracts the variable names from the screenshot that I provided. Now, you could equally have taken a screenshot of the Excel file itself. So maybe you're vibe coding with the chatbot and it didn't produce that code that said head parentheses data. And so you didn't get this little pop-up analysis. That's okay. It would have worked just as well if I had gone back to my Excel file and done a screenshot of the data in that way. So it's not a limited thing where you've got to do it from R or you've got to do it from Excel. It's a really flexible system, and that's part of the power of these iterative chatbot type tools. Okay, so we've got, let me just go ahead and X that out. We've got this screenshot situation where it read in my variables, and now it's going to give me some options. The first one, it says, just produce a correlation matrix. The next one, it says, give me that correlation test with p-values. And then this one says, a compact version where we've got that correlation matrix with p-values baked in. So what I want to do is go ahead and visualize what each of these will do so that we can be all on the same page with the potential outputs that ChatGPT might give to you. So we're just going to do that first one, correlation matrix base R. And I'm just going to put my cursor over this little copy button here and click that, so I've now got all of the information in this chat window copied over. And I'm going to head over to R and copy and paste that in my upper left-hand pane. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just run through each of these portions of code to see what happens when we process it. All right, so the first thing we didn't actually need because it says select only numeric variables, but they're all numeric, so that's okay. Then the next one says we're going to form a correlation matrix, and that's going to be Pearson correlation by default. You don't really need to stress out about what Pearson versus Spearman is. We're not going to worry about that just now. Okay, so I'm going to click the second bit where it says that it's going to run a correlation analysis. Now, again, just like what we've talked about before, this code is running the actual correlation analysis. Now we have to say, all right, I named my correlation analysis core underscore matrix. Now I want to see what the output actually looks like. So I'm going to hit run to take a look at that correlation output. Now at this point, and I'm just going to move my panes around a little bit here, the correlation output is down here, right? So this tells me all possible pairwise correlations between all of my variables. So you'll notice what it's done is taken all four of my variables here, mosquito abundance, temperature in degrees Celsius, relative humidity, and distance to water, and I also have all of those variables listed down in my column. So what that's done is given me every correlation between every single variable. So for example, if I want to know the correlation between a mosquito abundance and each of my different variables, all I have to do is pair them up. Now, naturally, the correlation between mosquito abundance and itself, mosquito abundance, is going to be exactly 1 because you're just plotting data against itself. So of course, that's going to be a perfect correlation, but that's also meaningless. What we're interested in is saying, okay, how is mosquito abundance correlated to temperature in degrees Celsius, relative humidity, and let me see if I can move that. Yeah, I can. Perfect. Okay, relative humidity and distance to water. And now I've got all of those variables. So when I look at the combination of mosquito abundance that I just highlighted with my cursor and temperature degrees Celsius, I can see that that correlation is a positive 0.992, et cetera, et cetera. So a very strong positive correlation. When I look at that relationship between mosquito abundance in the first column and relative humidity in my third row, I see that all of a sudden we've got a much weaker relationship. Now we've got a correlation of, again, positive, but only 0.016. And then last but not least, I can look at mosquito abundance and the distance to water. And again, when I look at that relevant pair moving down from the relevant column and over from the relevant row, I can see again, I've got a really strong positive relationship between mosquito abundance and the distance to water. In this case, a correlation coefficient of positive 0.961 if you round up. Okay, so at this point, I've got a pretty good feel for what's likely going to be significant versus insignificant in those relationships. But before we move forward, what I want us to do then is take a look at the other options that ChatGPT or whatever your chatbot is has given us to read in those correlations. Okay. So in option number two, I've got correlation test with p-value. Now, this is a really important next step because you'll notice when I ran this first option of code, I got my correlation coefficients, but no data on whether or not those correlations were actually significant. So for that, we need to have the associated p-values that go along with our correlation coefficients. So now what I'm going to do is copy off this chat window where it says to correlation test with p-values. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that over just like I do normally with that button. And then, whoops, not zoom. And then I'm going to go back over to R and I'm going to copy and paste it in my upper right hand pane. Okay, so let's go ahead and here we go. So I'm going to start clicking run just so you can see exactly what this is going to do. So for this one, what it's got me doing is individual correlations. So you can see up here, we've got core test, data, mosquito abundance, and then data temperature. So what this is giving me is a correlation assessment of only mosquito abundance versus only temperature. Now you'll notice here that at the bottom, we've got that correlation coefficient of 0.99203, and I've got that highlighted there for you. That's exactly the same as what we got above. The only difference is that instead of giving us a whole correlation matrix like what we ran before, this is an individual correlation between only mosquito abundance and only temperature. And that's what each of these pairwise correlation tests does. So for this second line that I've got here, you'll see it's of mosquito abundance, there's mosquito abundance, versus relative humidity. And when I hit run on that, it's going to output that exact same correlation coefficient that we had before. And again, I could do the same thing for distance to water. This isn't giving us any new information. It's just a piecemeal correlation analysis rather than a big correlation matrix like what we did before. Now, I personally prefer the correlation matrix approach because I'm not running multiple different lines of code and I get all the information that I need at once. But they're equally valid approaches that will give you the exact same outcome. Okay. Now, at this point, we're going to get down here to where we're thinking a little bit about the p-values that are going to get oh, oops, they've already got our p-values there. Just kidding. In this case, we've also got those p-values that are produced up here for each one of those tests. So when we take a look at this first one that we ran, and this one shows us, let me just find it in my code there so I can highlight it for you. It shows us mosquito abundance, and we'll just use the temperature example. Not only do we have that exact same correlation coefficient that we got before, but over here, we also have a p-value. Now, unsurprisingly, with a correlation coefficient of 0.992, we've got a highly significant relationship here. The p-value is 1.083 times 10 to the negative fifth, so incredibly significant. And if we go down here, we can also do the same thing with mosquito abundance versus relative humidity. So I've got that highlighted there for you so you can see where to get that relationship. And we see that correlation again was really weak, 0.016. And unsurprisingly, when we find the associated p-value, it is super not significant, 0.97, way above our cutoff of 0.05, so a extremely not significant relationship. And then same deal moving down further when we get to our relationship between mosquito abundance and the distance to water. Again, we had a really strong correlation down here of 0.96, and unsurprisingly, we have a significant p-value of 0.00056, etc. Okay. So that's one way that you can get those correlation coefficients that are at the bottom of the output there and p-values that are at the top of the output there. But I do want to just go ahead and head over to our chatbot and go ahead and take a look at this last option where it says correlation matrix with p-values parentheses compact version. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that gives us. And again, I'm just going to hover over this copy button, click it off here, and head over to R, where I'm then going to get it pasted in. Okay, so I'm going to head up to where I have this here. So it says function to calculate correlation matrix with p-values, and we're just going to hit run and see what happens. Okay, so that just did the analysis, and now what we want to do is name what our results will be. And so this is just saying I'm going to name this results. So I'm going to click that in. And now what we're going to do is actually visualize those results. This is just producing a correlation matrix, and what this does for us is produce an associated correlation, or excuse me, produce an associated matrix, but of the p-values themselves. So here what we've got is our p-values for each of those different relationships there. Again, following off with that same placement of mosquito abundance as our first column variable, and then each of our row variables now just labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, rather than with their actual names. So again, you can get all of the exact same information, just presented in slightly different ways. Okay, so now we figured out how to interpret our correlation data. We know where to get our correlation coefficients, so those values that are bounded between -1 and +1, and we know how to get the associated p-values. The next step that we want to do in running correlation analyses then, or in analyzing our data, is say, all right, we've got our correlation coefficients information and we know which relationships are significant. So now, how can we investigate those relationships further using linear regression? Because in our case, all of these relationships are linear relationships. So what we're going to do is think a little bit about that. Okay, so we said that we have three relationships that we want to explore, the relationship between mosquito abundance and each of our three different potential explanatory variables that are these various environmental factors. When we looked at our analyses, we found that two of them were significant. First, when we correlated mosquito abundance versus temperature, we got a super significant relationship between those two. Our correlation was incredibly significant. We did not find a significant relationship with relative humidity, so we're done exploring that one. And we did find a significant relationship with distance to water. So at this point, we've identified the two variables that we want to explore further their relationship with mosquito abundance, and that is distance to water and not relative humidity, temperature in degrees Celsius, because those are our significant relationships. So step two of this process is saying, now that I've identified in my exploratory correlation analysis which variables are significantly related with mosquito abundance, now let's do a linear regression to figure out exactly how mosquito abundance changes per unit increase in each of my potential explanatory variables. So let's go ahead and do that code using our chatbot to help us. So just like what we've done before in using chatbots, the key thing here is tell the bot exactly what you want to do and be specific with your variables. So what I'm going to do to make things easy on myself is I'm just going to go into this output that we had here of our correlation coefficient and p-values, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight this top string of data that I have there. And so I'm going to highlight it, and then I'm going to copy that information. Now I'm going to head over into my chatbot and I'm going to say, I want to run a linear regression analysis on these variables. And I'm going to copy and paste them in. But I don't want to run just data, or I don't want to run data cache symbol mosquito abundance and data cache symbol temperature degrees Celsius. So I'm just going to delete that extra out and only leave my variable names so that R knows, or excuse me, so that the chatbot knows exactly what I want to do. Okay, so I want to run a linear regression analysis on these variables, and then I've got the variables listed there. And then I'm going to tell it that mosquito abundance, and I'm going to copy and paste that so I get it just right, is my dependent variable. And temperature, and I'm again just going to copy and paste this so that I don't get any typos or anything, is my independent variable. Write code for this analysis in R. And then I hit enter. And now it's going to think. There we go. It's letting me know what it's doing. writing out that code for me. Here we go. It's thinking about what I might want. And it's telling me about checking assumptions. We're not going to worry too much about that. It's giving me a potential scatter plot, giving me an even cleaner version if I might want that. We're just going to let it finish up. And then it's saying, okay, let's see how you feel about all that. So let's go back up to the top just like we did before and work our way through each of our options. And we're going to start with the simplest start, fit the linear model. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this copy button again and then head back over into R. All right. So first thing we're going to do is just run the model itself that the chatbot has named model. Okay, so I'm going to hit run. There we go. And it went ahead and did it. Oops, sorry, I was on the wrong line of code. My bad, guys. So now I hit run and it ran that model for me. LM is just the way it's letting me know it did a linear regression. And then it's saying of mosquito abundance versus temperature in degrees Celsius. And this is it just saying that the data I'm pulling is the data file I named data. So down here, we can see it ran the model. But at this point, I don't know what the model output is. For that, I need to use this handy dandy little piece of code that R gave me called view model summary. And now I'm going to hit run on that and voila, it's given me my linear regression output. Now at this point, I've really got pretty much everything I need, right? I've got my y-intercept. I've got the estimate for the relationship between temperature and mosquito abundance. That's our slope. So my slope is 17.0583. And I've got p-values for those relationships. Down here, it also gives you a handy dandy little significance code there so you can see exactly what these asterisks mean. But at this point, I've really got everything I need. I've got my y-intercept so that I could build out that line of the relationship between mosquito abundance and temperature. I've got my slope for how mosquito abundance changes per unit increase in temperature. I've got everything that I need for this relationship. Now, let's go ahead and take a look over here. And we're not going to really worry too much about those. You're welcome to run those if you'd like. But what I want to do is go ahead and head over here where we can take a look at visualizing that data, because I always find it really helpful to visualize what that data looks like so I can get a more intuitive idea of the data that I'm using to produce that analysis and a visualization of just how that dependent variable changes as a product of my independent. So what we're going to do is take this chat window and hit copy and then head over R to just see what that looks like when we actually run it. So I've just copied it and pasted it into my upper left-hand window and then I'm going to hit run. Oh, I'm actually really glad that it did this because I didn't hit my first line of code there, and so it gave me an error. And I'm actually really glad that this happened. I didn't do it on purpose, but what I want to do is again show you how you can use that screenshot option to do a little bit of troubleshooting with the chatbot. So I've got an error message here now. Maybe I don't realize it's because I forgot to hit that first line of code. So what I'm going to do is print screen that error message right here. Okay. And now I'm going to go back over into my chatbot to ask the chatbot what went wrong. I got this error message. And then I'm going to copy in my image and hit enter to see what the chatbot tells me. So it's thinking about it. And it tells me exactly what I did wrong. That error means I tried to run this before creating a plot, but that function, abline, adds a line to an existing plot, so R needs the scatter plot first. And so now the chatbot tells me, all right, go away. The chatbot tells me, you got to get this in the right order, right? You need to run these at the same time. So I can just copy and paste that over, head back over into R, and now I can actually run the code properly. Okay, did that. It gives me that plot, and now I add in my line. And when I do that, you'll notice that it works out really nicely. So now I've got this relationship between mosquito abundance and temperature in degrees Celsius, and I can visualize exactly what that linear regression looks like. Okay, so another use of those screenshots isn't just telling the chatbot what you want it to do, but also saying, oh no, chatbot, I got this error. Here's what it is. Please tell me what to do. Now, of course, you can also just copy and paste this in. You don't have to use a screenshot situation. But again, I just want to emphasize the flexibility of that model. Okay, so to finish this up, the last thing that we want to do is that final regression analysis for our second significant data, our second significant relationship, which was between mosquito abundance and distance to water. So again, I'm just going to highlight that right there and then copy those variable names over, copy, and then I'm going to head back over to my chatbot and say, I want to run a linear regression between these variables, and I spelled it wrong. And then I'm going to copy and paste them, make sure that I get rid of this information, the data and the dollar sign that are not my variable names. And then I'm going to tell it again what my dependent and independent are. So I'm just going to copy and paste that is the dependent variable, and dist water is the independent variable. It's hard to type while talking. Write our code for this analysis. And then we're just going to let the chatbot think about it for a sec. It's going to tell us what we're doing, and you'll see it's really the exact same code that we ran before. Now I'm going to go ahead and just put that in there so you can see what that final output's going to look like. So I just copied and pasted it in my upper left-hand pane. I'm going to run that model and view what that model looks like. And now I've got my y-intercept. I've got my slope for distance to water. It's 1.1060. And I'm willing to bet, although I didn't look, and I'm going to go down here, that it probably gave me my scatter plot. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that over into my results here. And now I'm just going to run that to get what that plot looks like. And you can see I've generated a new scatter plot over in my bottom right-hand pane there. Okay, so that finishes our click-by-click walkthrough. I do strongly encourage you to download that data set and literally follow along with me as I do this so that you can get that experience running the code with me before you're asked to do it on your own. So that is all we've got for running an exploratory correlation analysis and following up with the appropriate linear regression analysis of significantly correlated relationships. All right, so as always, I hope this was helpful for you. Now you're just going to need to go into the appropriate module in our Carmen course, download the relevant data files that are specified for you in that homework assignment, and then run through this same process, but on your own using those principles that we talked about. I am going to go ahead and end the video now, but as always, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.